Welcome back to the Rainbow Bridge Podcast. I'm your host, Nayshondra Mercer, but you know you can call me Coach Nay. And oh, by the way, today we're going to talk about something that I have never talked about exclusively in my 14 years in the podcasting arena. And this episode for today is going to be entitled, Gay Girl, Good Dad. You're probably wondering, what the heck is Nay getting ready to talk about with a title like that? Well, before I can tell you what the title stands for, I have to first go back to our episode on last week. So in last week's episode, Blocking Your Blessings, I talked about how we as humans can block our own blessings if we aren't in a position to receive God's word when he speaks it over us. And we've been talking about how it can be hard to receive God's word and the things that he said about you and the call that he has placed over your life if your heart posture is not in the right place. If you have a stony heart, if you have a heart that is shallow, whether it's full of thorns, or if you are good ground. And I talked to you about how you can block your own blessings and have to see somebody else get what it is that God called you to do. And we talked about King Saul and King David and how that was the dynamic between the two of them when King Saul lost his access to his crown, all because of his prideful nature. And I shared with you at the end of that episode that I resonated with possibly blocking my own blessing. And I stated that it was around the situation of this podcast. Well, let's talk some more about that and get a little more personal than I normally do and share with you how this podcast came to be and why I wanted to create it. So, as many of you know, since you're here, I am a believer. I was raised in the church and I still attend the church. However, I am of the kingdom mindset, and I believe that church is a building, a structure that God's people gather to so that they can fellowship and pray and fast together. But they're supposed to leave that building, which is the church, represented as the bride. And they are to go out into the world where God's kingdom is, in which everyone is welcome. Before I get into my story, I want to make that emphasis very clear that although I grew up in the church and God's kingdom are two different things. And while I go to church every day, church is a refresher. It's a weekly reminder. It's an opportunity for me to place myself in God's presence amongst his people, to remind myself of how great he is, so that on the days where I'm not in the church building, and maybe my day's not going so great, or maybe I'm not feeling very well, or it's just a really challenging mental health day that day, that I am out in the kingdom and I have something that can get me through until it's time to gather again. Because to me, my friends, God's kingdom is more of a lifestyle. Church is something we can do, right? Kingdom, to me, represents how you show up when you're out in the world and amongst everyone else. It's how you show up when you're with others and when you're not in your place of worship. It's this external space that we are all sharing together collectively as humans on this earth. Each of us independently and individually going through our own journeys, but doing so collectively right beside each other in the same space. And each of us has our own thoughts, feelings, emotions. We have our own values. We have our own beliefs. Some of those are religious. Some are deemed to be more spiritual. And there's a debate out in the world about the two. But if you ask me, because you're here, they're the different sides of the same coin to me. Religion is an organized group of thought and action by a group of people who all agree upon those things. So things such as going to church, things such as getting baptized in order to be saved, or to profess with your mouth in order to be saved, or to be a covered woman or not, whether or not to engage in certain libations. All of these different things are agreed upon by different subsects of individuals who are in different religions. Spirituality, however, is greater than and outside of that, in the sense that it speaks to your own individual relationship with your Creator, and how seeking a relationship with Him will force you to improve yourself. Because when you look for He that made you, what you find is how you are in Him, meaning, how are you like your Maker? How are you like God? How are you dislike Him? All of us are children to somebody's parents, right? I got a mama and a daddy. You got a mama and a daddy. We know, some of us, who those individuals are. And there are times where when you're growing up and you're going through this journey called life, you might decide that there are some things about you you don't love, and you want to change those things. And then when you take the steps to change those things, such as maybe going to therapy, or maybe doing some deep internal work by reading books and journaling, listening to podcasts, and reading books about personal growth and development. Along the way, I guarantee you, my friend, you're going to find something about yourself that you don't like. And when you come up on that thing, you're asking yourself, where is it that this came from? Why is it that I do this that way? Why do I always do X, Y, and Z? And when you begin to ask yourself those kinds of questions, you are in the space of a great change, because here is the moment where you're getting ready to learn exactly who God is because of who you are not. And maybe I need to say that better. I've said previously, what you're seeking is seeking you. And a lot of times when we're not fulfilled with something, or we're not feeling like we're living up to our highest potential, we're searching for something. And a lot of times we'll look for that fulfillment in other things, such as getting the promotion. We think that maybe if we make more money, then we'll be more happy. If we feel like we get into that relationship, then we'll feel like we're worthy. We'll feel like we're loved. We feel like if we're finally able to have our family, then we can undo everything that we saw growing up as children and do it better. But I'm going to save you a lot of time, my friend, and let you know that that is not how it works. And what ends up happening is you begin to really uncover who you are underneath all of the internalized messaging that you have taken from others. And I said all that to say that that is why the title of this episode is Gay Girl, Good Dad. Because something less obvious than my love for God and my walk with Christ is that I am same-sex attracted, and that I have been dating women almost exclusively my entire adulthood. And it's something that I don't necessarily talk about because I don't consider it a part of my messaging specifically or a part of my brand. It's just a piece of who I am. And it is a part of me that I've always known was there, as young as 4 years old. But because I grew up in the church and receiving some of the same messages that a lot of you received, I instantly denied any of those feelings because I felt like I wouldn't be accepted. And I had these feelings, this awareness as young as 4 and all through elementary, middle school, high school. But I also was very well read, even as a child. And I loved understanding human behavior. And I remember reading one day in an article or a book somewhere that children do not solidify their sexuality at least until they're in their early 20s, excuse me. So I knew as a child that maybe it was something. This was my thought. Maybe I'll just outgrow it because I don't even really know yet. I hadn't even really figured it out yet because according to science, I'm not going to figure this out at least until I graduate high school, right? So that's what I was thinking. I quickly learned during my freshman year in college, when I'm finally off on my own and I'm doing my own thing, that those feelings were not going away. And I decided to explore them. And at the time, I was in a relationship with my high school sweetheart who I had been with from the age of 15 all the way to almost 21, and shared that part of me with him. And I'll never forget him for this. And he said to me, you know, Nayshondra, I know how much you love me. So if you're really feeling like that, then that means you're really feeling like that. And he couldn't have known it at the time because we were still kids. You know, I'm talking about like 19, 20 years old. But his acceptance of me and this new part of me that I was sharing with him got me to thinking that maybe it wasn't something that I needed to be in the closet about. And so time would go on and my family would become aware, and I had an experience that I wished for anyone who is same-sex attracted and shares that information with their family. My family was always very loving and open and accepting of me, which helped me to stand into my truth and be open about the women that I was dating and when I was dating them. And I tried my best to stand in my truth with full authenticity and without shame, but I would be lying if I told you that I didn't have some. And those doubts and fear of God, just, you know, feeling like I am not doing what it is you want me to be doing, I'm not living the life that you want me to live, and feeling so confused by that because professionally I was killing it. I was advancing in my career. I was always moving on to the next thing and increasing my money and getting all these accolades. And so the fruit of my life was plentiful and noticeable to others, but they didn't know this other piece of me. So when I was at work and I was doing well and I was getting all these accolades and talking to the other women and men at my job who were of faith, we only connected on our relationship and love for God. There was never a reason for them not to accept me or to believe that I was also a daughter of God, because they didn't know. And a part of my mind made me think that if people really knew, if they really knew that I love other women romantically, that maybe they would think that the light that they saw on me wasn't real. And I battled with that during the time where all of us were really battling with ourselves, which was COVID era. And I was the most depressed I'd ever been in my entire life. I was having panic attacks on the daily. I was drinking way more wine than I needed to fall asleep. I'm talking some nights 2.5 bottles. Okay. Struggling. Waking up every day and waking up angry that I had woken up. I was in my own hell. I had lost myself. I was doing things that I wouldn't normally do. I was dating people that weren't representing the same kind of values that I had. And I felt like I did not recognize myself anymore. And the panic attacks would get worse, and the insomnia would become worse. And I had a couple of breakdowns. And in one of my breakdowns, God answered me. And it is this part of my story where I realized that my heart was stony. I was so afraid of all the things that God had told me to do that I had heard clearly. Things that he had shown me in dreams, synchronicities that I would hear from other people, speaking life over me, speaking things into my life, visions that I would have, feelings and sensations, the overall tingly feeling of joy that I receive. I just ignored all of those answers and responses from him because I was afraid of this very moment, of talking to the world about how I navigate my relationship with God as a woman who is same-sex attracted. And what I learned was I needed to trade in my thorny heart. I needed to trade in my thorny heart for a new one. And so one day, in the deepest of prayer and meditation that I have ever experienced in my life, I got a new heart. And it was that day that I accepted the full Spirit of God. The one that in Romans 8 says that, therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Jesus Christ, because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit who gives life has set you free from the law of sin and death. For what the law was powerless to do, because it was weakened by flesh, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in the flesh, meaning Jesus came down and he condemned sin by taking on flesh himself, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us, who do not live according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Now, Romans 8 continues to talk about what it means to have the Spirit of God living in you. And truly, it means that you have received him into your heart, that you receive the things that he said about you, and to know that he loves you. And once I finally accepted that God knew every single piece of me, he knew my thoughts, he knows the love, he knows the feelings. And yet he told me that he loved me anyways. And it was during that moment of hearing him tell me anyways that my grace is sufficient for you, that I fully accepted who I am. And remembering that if God is for us, who can be against us? And learning and knowing even more than that, that nothing can separate me from the love of God. And nothing can separate you from the love of God. And if you are like me and you grew up believing that you couldn't be loved or that you couldn't be accepted or that God was punishing you, I want you to know that God is love and that He does love you. And that is my reasoning for creating this podcast and creating this space. It is the reason why the name of this episode is Gay Girl, Good Dad, because God, my Father, has been a good dad to me. And before I leave you, for those of you who are like me, and you strayed away maybe from your relationship with God because of what you've heard the church say or incorrect teachings that you've heard growing up, I want you to remember that God knew you even before He formed you in your mother's belly. Before you were ever here, He thought about you. Think about that for a moment. Before you were ever a thought of your own mother's, you were a thought of His. And He has a plan for you. And He has a plan for me. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those He predestined, He also called. Those He called, He also justified. Those He justified, He also glorified. I want you to hear that you are justified. I am justified. And nothing can separate us from the love of God. Not even incorrect teaching. Not even what some others may call a choice. However you feel about the issue or not, you are still loved. You are still loved, and you have the right to be loved. Because nothing can separate you from the love of God. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Rainbow Bridge Podcast. This one was deep, y'all, and I got more vulnerable than I could have imagined. But my prayer is that you're receptive. My prayer is that you understand. My prayer is that we can have more thoughtfully engaging conversations moving forward. And until then, peace and blessings to you.
This has been a Forecast Media Podcast Network presentation. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. For more information and more great Forecast Media content, visit pushplaypods.com.
At Lowe's, this Veterans Day and every day, verified military members, veterans, and their spouses get automatic silver status in My Lowe's Rewards with free standard shipping, plus 10% off eligible purchases with no annual limit. It's one way we honor and give back to those who have served and still do. Learn more now at lowes.com/military. 10% discount can't be combined with another offer. Exclusions, terms, and conditions apply. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.